Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Drew. I'm so sorry I can't make it out there. It sounds like an amazing conference. And so I have a talk that I'd like to share, but I would like to start with this video, just to sort of start orienting ourselves into the content of this game. If you haven't already played it, or even if you did, this might help shed some insight. It's a behind-the-scenes video, and I served as a lead writer, and also, I don't want to call it a cultural consultant, because often that's what Indigenous people are often relegated to. You know, automatically think of consultant, that's an imbalance. And so I'd say just a cultural collaborator, someone who shared maybe an Indigenous perspective and an appreciation for the elders. So that was my involvement. However, there were all kinds of people who did just absolutely amazing work. Actually, sometimes I feel bad because they put in thousands of hours, and I put in maybe a lot of my, the blood, sweat, and tears of a life of being Indigenous and gaining and culling that knowledge. But they worked to the bone. It's an amazing team. Eline Media in Seattle and Cook Inlet Tribal Council are the producers. They financially backed it. They're involved in every step of the way. That's a tribal service organization in Anchorage. And they collaborated to create this company called Upper One Games. And it's called Upper One because we call the rest of the United States the lower 48. So that you guys are from the lower 48, and so it was a play on the words Upper One. So I would love to play the game right now, and just during the time that we have, or to play the video, and just during the time that we have, I could share this talk. Maybe we could have a little bit of questions and answers at the end of the workshop. So Koyana. Araga, that's what my elders would say. Araga. I'm so pleased and thankful and satisfied is what my elders would say. Just to be communicating with you from so far. And I so much wish I could be there. But let's play this video.
All right, we're playing it.
With the passing of each elder, they take with them lots of pieces of information, of knowledge that perhaps none of us will ever know. Changes have come so fast, and we've become so ingrained in Western media. We're not producing our own to present who we are and the way we view the world from our perspective.
Even today, there are some kids never been on a caribou hunt. They've never had certain foods, never been out on the ocean. Our people are so rich in culture, it's hard to believe that your own kind is lacking up.
That it's just absolutely critical that we do anything and everything we can to reclaim those parts of our past that have seemed to have gone by the wayside.
That's a huge challenge.
Neverlone is a video game. It's a game that's been created in deep partnership with members of the Inupiaq community, and it's an invitation for players all around the world to explore the amazing values, history, and storytelling tradition of the Inupiaq culture.
All over the world, there are cultures that are just not represented in video games, and many of these cultures have very powerful mythologies and stories that have survived thousands and thousands of years. They're really one generation guiding another generation through their wisdom, through the power of storytelling. The idea that we extend storytelling into player-driven storytelling, into computer and video games, is a very powerful notion for how to keep this great tradition alive and further it into the next century.
we've been able to bring our community into the development and production process, where we're bringing elders, storytellers, young people, linguists from our community to be a part of the process of developing the game from beginning to end.
It's an opportunity not to make a game about a community, but to make a game with a community, and to have a fusion of voices in a way that really hasn't been done extensively in this medium.
The visual style of the game was deeply inspired by Alaska Native art and their artists. To me, by looking at that and observing the way they work with the materials, gave me the ideas how to create the world for this game. The very soft, very beautiful world.
What success looks like to me as an Alaska Native is that we create a video game where the community feels proud of it, that our young people can look at themselves and say, that's my culture.
There's a connection from my generation to the next generation, to our kids' generation. And this game is going to take it to the next level.
The people have done the work, they've done the research, they've spent the time with the elders, they went out to the communities, and maybe this is one of the first times ever that Indigenous stories can really be seen.
I knew this was going to come someday, but to use it as a tool to teach, that's something else. And that is something I could say that I'm proud of being a part of. I couldn't be any happier.
Right. Brianna, so that was just a little bit of an exploration of sort of the people behind the game. But I do have a talk that I prepared for you guys just to try to orient ourselves in some of the themes, the key themes and concepts around trying to make this game happen. And really to try to work with an oppressed, marginalized people. I mean, that's really with immense treasures and gifts to offer. So that's kind of some of those themes, and I think it might, even if however far removed Alaska feels, I think maybe some of these themes can be relatable. It can touch on experiences in communities all over. So, Gunachish Kuyana, thanks so much for having me. Thanks to Drew Davidson and everyone involved in the Transformational Experience Summit. Thank you for your hospitality, and even from this distance, I really feel that hospitality. And for organizing an excellent conference on the crucial theme of making media that matters. My involvement with Kisima Ingachuna, Never Alone, produced by my highly accomplished, deeply attentive partners at Upper One Games, has taught me many things about making media that matters. It has also given me great satisfaction and fulfillment toward confirming what I've long deeply felt in my whole being. The voice of the elders, their stories, their beauty, the voice of the elders is and always will be the great standard bearer of our people, and an endlessly renewable source of literary and spiritual nourishment, if we take care of it. We take care of it by protecting what makes it special, and respecting the source and seeking to understand its value and meaning. In order to accomplish these tasks, it is not enough to merely say, yes, I agree. Or in other contexts and communities, you might even say, yeah, I'm an ally, right? Though that is a good start. Especially if we've been indoctrinated in a monolingual English Western world there could be barriers to understanding, even as we are raised to believe internally, unconsciously, that our understanding is universal and without any barriers of difficulty, nuance, or reorientation when interacting with other peoples. My colleague in Tlingit country, see, I'm Tlingit from my father and Inupiaq from my mother, Ernestine Hayes of the Gooch Hit, the Wolf House of the Kabwantan, one of the major clans of Tlingit country, first introduced me to the concept of Indigenous intellectual authority. Indigenous intellectual authority. And this concept helps me to understand what needs to be done in our institutions across America. To suggest the importance of Indigenous intellectual authority speaks to the lack of that kind of authority felt among intellectual leaders such as Hayes. To announce its validity is to take a stand. We are elevating Indigenous intellectual authority because Western institutions can blot it out of the map, overlook it, ignore it, misunderstand, and misread it. We need to take a stand and show who we are in all our complexity, our beauty, our flaws, and our uniqueness. We need to create transformative experiences across cultures where we can convey, in some small sense, the spirit and character of our beings, our people, our history and heritage. Not only must we share our literary masterworks, many of which are buried in the haze of second or third-hand folklore, but we must also somehow surrender to the complete feeling of our personhood and cultural textures, and ask for and even demand space for such feeling in places that never recognized it before. Indigenous cultures have taught me that you need to pay attention to your whole being when you are learning, when you're taking something in, some bit of new knowledge, a new slice of perception. Things can easily be missed. This is a great risk. It is a great risk for both sides, for Western institutions and for the Indigenous people who have been locked in oppression, silence, and stereotype for centuries. For Westerners, you're giving up something. There's no way around it. You're giving up some kind of power which you have possessed, maybe even without knowing it, for as long as you've lived. It is the power to recognize whatever you like, when you like, how you like, or to completely ignore it, practically without any consequence. The power to stand over an ongoing history of destruction and to decide for yourself whether it should be acknowledged or not, or whether it should be overlooked as if it had never happened. It is a risk for Indigenous people to engage in the systems that have oppressed them for centuries, because the silence and anguish may continue anyway, no matter how much we insist on our participation and creative and recognition. Our elders have all the creative and intellectual agency in the world, but because of the unfamiliar forms their knowledge takes, that's oral, an oral worldview versus a literate one is one of the major ones, and the complete lack of effort most give to understand those forms, and because there is subversive power in the words, a power that is a power to reclaim land, language, heritage, personhood, and freedom. And perhaps that power is unconsciously fear. The stories are so good that it's absolutely baffling to me that they are shunted aside. Underneath the debris of folkloric haze and second or third hand filter, there is immense treasure just beneath the surface. But when you consider what it costs to recognize such treasure, there is great empowerment for all humanity on the one hand, and our elders are overwhelmingly in support of sharing their gifts with the world. But then, on the other hand, to acknowledge such treasures is to give up some power and to reopen the floodgates of questions of land, genocide, and restitution. These are difficult questions, great risks, and only when we can begin to ask these questions and take those risks will healing across cultures begin, and the great gifts of our elders will be cherished by all. Many of these issues are incredibly serious and topics of great concern. But our goal, the team's goal, was always to create an enjoyable, exciting, and even accessible game that can be played by nearly all ages and all people. It's a fun game about a girl and a fox. However, we just happen to believe that the best way to accomplish that task was through the voice and vitality of the elders. And by engaging in these issues, it would make us the best equipped to create the game to our standards and to those of the Inupiaq community whose trust and collaboration we've worked very hard to earn. I'm immensely grateful and proud of this rare kind of collaboration. There's Gloria O'Neill, she's the president, you saw her on that video, of the Cook Inlet Tribal Council. And there's who's with Pitta Benz and Amy Ferdine and other people at CITC. And there's creative director Sean Vesey, who's really, I think, his leadership, I worked most closely with Sean. You also saw him on that video. Art director Dima Variafel, lead designer Grant Roberts, producer Matt Swanson, and Eline Company leaders like Alan Gershenfeld, Michael Angst, and Larry Goldberg. They all provided pivotal leadership for this project. And it just took a great amount of listening and taking that risk. They recognize and appreciate what many of my Inuit elders embody. The human spirit, mind, and body is still the greatest technology that we have, and the media that matters the most. When an elder tells a story in the Karigi, the community house, it creates a bond among all participants that will last many generations after them. It nourishes expansive minds that span the whole tundra and all its endless variations of weather, landscape, and ecological populations. It offers wisdom that teaches us how to be true human beings. When the spirit of the Karigi, while the spirit of the Karigi must be renewed in old-fashioned, intergenerational, human-to-human exchange, it could thrive in books and even video games if it is cared for properly. We sought to shape the game with those underpinnings, starting with selecting the key theme of interdependence as a model for both storytelling and gameplay. As the lead characters, Nuna and her fox friend work independently across the challenging and powerfully abundantly alive. Sometimes people call this the barren, harsh landscapes. It is powerfully, abundantly alive, the terrain of the Arctic. We also chose to structure the game around Inupiaq Elitkwazit, the Inupiaq values, a list developed by Inupiaq elders, including knowledge of language. And so we had James Nagayak, one of our key elders, his voice throughout the game, through the narrative that I co-wrote with Sean, and also working with so much of the story of Robert Cleveland. Sharing and respect for elders. Some of these key things that allowed us to check, okay, are we reaching these values? Are we reaching this interdependence? Finally, we chose to build the game around the story of Kunuk Sayuka, told by Robert Nazareth Cleveland. And he was one of the greatest documented storytellers ever, whose achievements would, as my mentor Robert Bringhurst suggested, when discussing master native storytellers, would, if it were evaluated by an independent literary panel, would be judged to be literary masterwork. To have authority is to have a measure of power. And this power should not be feared, at least until it shows what it can do. I've seen what Indigenous intellectual authority can achieve. It can upend oppressive systems. It can bound across everything you thought you knew, soaring into deeper reservoirs of wisdom than you ever knew you had, a far greater range of knowledge than you thought you could possess. It can orient your being to the land where you live, to the point where you know it so completely as home. It starts with and is most deeply realized in the voice of our elders. It springs in abundance from there, from our modern writers of English to students beginning to learn Tlingit or Nuklalk or Chipewyan or Inuktitut, or any of the 500 plus indigenous languages of this continent. This type of intellectual and spiritual vitality can even be acknowledged and understood among those raised outside of the culture, without the language, and distant from its worldviews. It starts with a lot of deeply invested listening. Cleana, thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to share some of my thoughts. I think a lot of it's very deeply personal, but hopefully some of these lessons, some of these ideas can connect with people who may be doing similar work or thinking about similar things. So, wonderful. I'm hoping we have just a few minutes if there's any questions or discussion.
Yeah, we do. Anybody have a question? You can hear us when you're talking to the mic.
Oh, us, people mics.
I'm coming here.
Okay. Hi, yeah. I loved Never Alone when I first played it. Excellent game. I'm curious, so I've heard that you guys have gone on to sort of create this concept of like a world game, or at least I've heard people talking about it around there. So I'm kind of wondering, like, sort of what's next? Is it sort of going deeper into like the Inupiaq culture? Is it finding other cultures to draw from, or what's next?
I don't think I have the ability to break news right now. But there's definitely some stuff that we're working on. I'm just very, very proudly involved, and one thing they did announce is they are discussing. They haven't confirmed anything with Hawaii. I haven't been involved on that leg, but there's also other projects potentially looming on the horizon, potentially connected with Alaska. So, sorry for that non-answer, but.
So you talk a lot about how this was a very personal project, but it was also, I believe, a very public and sort of commercial project as well. Like, this wasn't just something that was going into an art gallery or something to be shared locally. It was something being published in the PlayStation Store. I'm curious how you dealt with that tension and where that showed up.
Well, I mean, a lot of what this dialogue was really trying to understand, going across worldviews and listening and empowering Native people. A lot of what I was trying to communicate was that once you get through that, it's not just throwing a bone to the poor, non-Western people. And often that's kind of how it's conceived in people's minds. They think that they're just they're reaching out from their privilege to help the poor people, kind of thing. And my argument really from the beginning was that the voice of our elders, the individually brilliant elders like Robert Cleveland, who's seriously as accomplished as Shakespeare, Sophocles, Homer, if you just take a moment to try to understand oral literature, Native American oral literature on its own terms, like we do with Elizabethan England or ancient Greece, if we just do that for a moment, we can start to learn how to respect and value their achievements, what they have to offer. And so that's what I was trying to communicate, and not just literary, but just really exciting and adventurous and fun and joyful and healing. You know, that the elders have those stories those things to share. And it just takes some time. It just takes opening yourself up to it. And so that's what I was trying to communicate. It's because sometimes what can happen in these kind of contexts, there can be a Western duality between, okay, we want to make something that's profitable, or we should make something that's authentic, you know, which that's not really a choice. I think if you, there's a market out there, there's people out there who want a real rich experience, and those people are everywhere. And if they know that there's a good collaboration with this historically oppressed people with an interesting, beautiful culture, you know, why not work closely with them?
I have a question for you. I believe it took several years to make this game. So across that time frame and your involvement, what were some of the more unexpected challenges and sort of pleasant surprises as you sort of collaborated across cultures?
Well, it kind of started with just that you know, that dualism of profitable versus authentic, the false, you know, narrative. I think that crept up a lot in the beginning. So it took a lot of trust building and working together. And then reading aloud the stories to each other. So they could go, oh yeah, you know, this actually is really, really amazing. And the less I mess with it, the more interesting it will be for people, or more of an aesthetic achievement or enjoyable kind of thing it'll be. They had to get to that point, but it started with like, we had a thing that was kind of Disney-ish, you know, where, I mean, the design was like, the little people of the Arctic were like these little boogeymen kind of creatures where, you know, the character could just throw them and then they poof, ah, you know, cute little boogeyman troll things where it fit like a Western kind of, you know, fairy tale idea, you know, when there's similarities, but it's its own thing.
Yeah, well, you've started to talk about what I was going to ask, actually, which is starting with such a rich story, such a great text, and with this rich culture that you want to talk about. How do you start moving from something that's so rich into something that's playable, and what are some of those challenges to that?
Well, I think once they got that idea, that general idea, I was okay with it being simple, with it being accessible, just on the terms of the people, though, on terms of the voice of the elders. And so what that meant for me was working with one of the great elders, Robert Cleveland. And while it's, you know, it's like reading one of the maybe not the great sonnets of William Shakespeare, but you just see, wow, that's a little nugget, but you want to read more. You know, you don't stop just with Romeo and Juliet, you know. So here's a small little piece where you don't necessarily get how awesome he is, but at least you get a little bit of it. You get a taste of it. That was the thing maybe I was most pleased about. And so even then there was a constant, you know, all the team, they're not just going to, you know, sort of, they need to be involved. They're not just going to follow orders, you know, like robots or whatever. They need to be creatively, totally invested. And I was totally with that, as long as we had that dialogue first, you know. And so there was a simplified story, a very direct, straightforward story. But something that I helped to include was as much text as sort of can be tolerated in a game, and even more. And then letting that be a high point is to listen to the story, even if you're not fully paying attention to the story, you see those texts, you know. And you hear the elder's voice.
what suggestions or recommendations would you have for keeping the integrity of stories overall? Whether something that is a native story or something that is personal to somebody, or translating that across different kinds of experiences.
Well, I think what makes Native American oral literature amazing is in many ways what makes the great writers of Western canon amazing. And while we have cartoons of Shakespeare and Homer, we know where the real goods are. Is to go directly to that voice, exactly what they said. Doesn't need to be rewritten or anything, And, what I was able to provide was to help them finesse it a little bit. To me, it's a great artistic achievement to sort of work through something where it still feels indigenous, where it still can be accepted by the elders. I mean, it takes a lot, even if it's simple, one simple line that you write there, or one simple concept of how something progresses. Even if it's very simple, if it reaches that spirit and character of the people, to me that's an amazing, that's my personal feeling for highest achievement. And I've actually written quite a bit in actual text and contributed to those concepts. It wasn't just from story to video game, it wasn't just, verbatim kind of thing. There was a lot of creative process to it. It was only about someone coming out of it, me coming out of the community, even if my perspective is not complete, it's not at all, I'm not an elder, but just the fact that I come out of this community, I paid attention to that world, and that voice is there. It's an equal collaboration, totally equal collaboration, and even at many points, privileging the voice of your collaborators, because this kind of thing, there's a power imbalance where they can decide for whatever they want, how much they want to include others. That's what position Western institutions often are, and so you got to kind of reorient yourself to where you're consciously being equal.
I have one more. I met Alan and Gloria at South by Southwest. They told a story, and I wondered if you could flesh this out even more about how, in terms of the story and the way it works in the culture, somebody owns it within the tribe. And I believe it's an older woman who owned the story that you all ended up using for the game, and how she had final approval, and that helped in terms of the trust you keep talking about. There was respect towards the story and the elders that helped both sides develop trust, and how you work through that.
Well, the way that I see it, in the oral world, everyone tells all kinds of stories. They know all the stories. And within that world, though, they make sure to acknowledge where they learned it. And we're keeping that value. But knowing that this was going out into a for-profit kind of thing, you're working with people's sort of spiritual, intellectual, treasures. That we needed to take a little bit of an extra step in terms of that intellectual property. And so that was working with Robert Cleveland's story, but his daughter, Minnie Gray, who you were alluding to, his daughter, Minnie Gray, herself is one of our great world treasures as a master storyteller. One of the few, actually, because when you have colonized people, you often lose you can retain your language, but you often lose that old growth wisdom, the master storytellers. It's an observation from my teacher, Robert Bringhurst. But she was someone who knew the story, who told the team the story, who sang the song to the story, and she gave her permission, and she gave her guidance, and saying it was okay, because initially it was a man, that's kind of the main thing, we're doing a girl and a fox, And so we changed it. And so we asked her if that was okay, and she embraced and accepted that. And so many of our elders did. In fact, it was overwhelmingly, I haven't heard one comment against the project. And that's another, very satisfying achievement. We also paid royalties, or paid a licensing fee to Minnie Gray, which I think is important. I think is very important. Some kind of honorarium, some kind of payment. It's not all about money, but especially when you're doing something for profit, I think that's very important.
So along with that process, was it at all important for, or how did you handle, I guess is probably a better way to ask it, for those people who sort of own the story or sort of drive the story to actually understand the experience of playing the game, not just how the story is woven through it? So was there any element of difficulty in them actually playing the actual interactive experience than just the narrative?
I think they had fun with it. They've all grown up around, technology, and while at the same time retaining their internalized indigenous values and keeping up things like subsistence hunting and fishing, and so our elders they saw that they took, and they also totally recognized the intergenerational divide, and I feel it all the time. I know how nourishing it is to be around an elder, but you got to sort of build that muscle, figure out how to gain, spend time with them and to take in what they have to offer. And so they saw this as a way to connect, using video games, which, of course it has a tendency to make people antisocial, where they're spending 16 hours a day, just on their computer, away from everybody. I mean, that happens in our communities like it does anywhere else. But using this as an opportunity to have them think about their people, have a positive, interesting expression of the people, in those experiences, and then give them an opportunity to maybe ask grandma, ask mom or dad about their culture after playing that video game. And one thing that was really neat was one of the librarians in one of the villages said that they're playing this game, and they go to libraries because that's often where the Wi-Fi is. They go to libraries, and they said they're playing that game. They're playing that game more than they're playing Minecraft. So, it's connecting.
Have one more? I'm out in front of the camera.
I'm in front. I guess I'm coming. Since a lot of the game is connected to storytelling and narrative in general, and gameplay, like actually playing the game, also creates its own narrative. Could you kind of speak to how you sort of brought that narrative, overarching narrative of the game and the game player's narrative together?
Well, that was also another creative tension, because the designers, they want to, and that's where the bread and butter is, a traditional, they decided to go with a traditional side-scrolling platform, puzzle platform. And so it was all about making world-class puzzles and, sort of things to get through, and that related to me in terms of just navigating the land and experiencing the land, and how it could be a challenge, but also very relaxing to think through your way to get somewhere, to get home. So that fit, but there was also, we needed to alter the landscape, because there's so much of the Arctic is flat, it's but we needed to add levels and add puzzles and traps and add different things that would make it playable and enjoyable, So there was a lot of us collaborating and thinking about what those kind of things would be. Like the spirits, these helping spirits, we talked about that a lot, how to achieve that. And I'm very satisfied with that, these spirits that sort of come in, and you could sort of jump on them, or they pick you up, or that kind of thing. And you could float from one place to another on them. And that connects to me in terms of those ancestral spirits that help you. And before, another one of those creative tensions was before, when I was trying to talk through this idea with them, they had this idea that they would just create something where you could just press a button, and then suddenly you're in spirit world, you know, where, you know, you can see all kinds of spirits around you, you know, and so that's very gamey mechanics kind of, but it didn't connect well with my indigenous concept of spirits, and so they had to figure that out. We had to figure that out together. So.
All right, Ishmael, thank you so much for taking the time to Skype with us here in Pittsburgh.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. I'm glad we got to do this. So you have a great day up there in Alaska.
Absolutely. Have a great conference. Thanks so much. And bye-bye.